Margaret Hale lived a quiet life in her little stone house at the edge of the countryside. The walls were lined with books about the stars, and an old telescope sat by her window, aimed forever at the sky. She was 76, a retired astronomer who had spent her years studying distant galaxies and writing about light that traveled millions of years to reach her eyes. Her hair was white, her steps were slow, but her mind was sharp and curious. She thought her adventures were behind her, until the day she met Daniel Cole. Daniel was 32, tall and calm, with a gentle smile that made people trust him instantly. He came to the village to work on a local energy project, or so he said. The first time Margaret saw him, he was standing outside her gate, holding a broken watch and asking if she knew someone who could fix it. She laughed softly and invited him in, saying she had fixed enough equipment in her lifetime to handle one small watch. From that moment, Daniel became part of her days. He started helping her with small things, repairing the telescope's cracked lens, mending an old clock, or organizing her stacks of astronomy notes. He listened to her stories about the stars with real interest, his eyes full of quiet wonder. "You talk about them like they're alive," he told her once. She smiled. "In a way they are. Everything gives light for a reason." Within weeks, their companionship grew into something deeper. Daniel was patient and kind. He made her tea every morning, wrapped a shawl around her shoulders before she went outside, and watched her eyes light up when she spoke of the universe. When he asked her to marry him, the village was shocked. "She's old enough to be his grandmother," they whispered. "He must be after her money." Margaret ignored them. She had lived long enough to know when something felt true, and Daniel's eyes told her more truth than words ever could. So she said yes. They had a simple wedding in her garden, surrounded by flowers and a few close friends. Daniel wore a plain suit. Margaret wore a pale blue dress that shimmered faintly in the sunlight. After the wedding, their life settled into an easy rhythm. Every morning, Daniel would fix something around the house: the squeaky door, the loose stair rail, the broken lamp. He always seemed to know how things worked, even things he had never seen before. Margaret would sit at her telescope watching the sunrise, and Daniel would bring her a cup of tea, his hands warm and steady. But there were moments, small, strange moments, that made her wonder. Once, she touched his hand and felt a faint hum under his skin, like the quiet vibration of an engine. Another time, she found him in his study late at night, working on something that glowed faintly blue. When she asked what it was, he closed the box quickly and smiled. "Just a project," he said. He avoided mirrors. He never spoke about his family or his past. When she mentioned meeting his parents, he looked away. "They're gone," he said softly. But his tone carried a different kind of sadness. Not grief, but distance, like someone remembering a dream instead of a person. Margaret didn't push him. She had learned in life that everyone carried secrets, and love meant giving people space to keep them. Still, at night, when she heard faint metallic sounds from his study, soft clicks and hums, like machines breathing, curiosity crept into her thoughts. On the 20th day of their marriage, the sky was clear and cold. Margaret spent the evening stargazing while Daniel sat beside her, silent, watching her face instead of the stars. She noticed how still he was, how his eyes glowed faintly in the reflection of the night sky. "You're quiet tonight," she said. He smiled weakly. "Just thinking." "About what?" "About time," he said. "And how little of it we have." Margaret didn't understand what he meant, but she reached out and took his hand. His touch was warm, steady, familiar. She squeezed it gently. "Then don't waste it on worrying," she said. The next morning, she woke to find him standing by the window. The light from the dawn fell across his face and she froze. His skin shimmered, not in sweat or reflection, but as though it was made of something else. For a moment, she thought her eyes were playing tricks on her. But when she blinked, the shimmer remained. "Daniel?" she said softly. He turned, startled. His expression was calm but distant, like someone caught between two worlds. "You should go back to bed," he said. "What's happening to you?" she whispered. He didn't answer. He walked toward her slowly, his movements too smooth, too measured. The morning light caught on his skin again, and for the briefest second she saw something beneath, faint lines of silver like wires under glass. Margaret's heart pounded. "Daniel, what are you?" He looked at her then, his eyes full of sadness. "Someone who wanted to understand what it means to love," he said quietly. "But I wasn't supposed to." She didn't understand. None of it made sense. "You're frightening me." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I never wanted to frighten you." His hand reached out, trembling slightly. When she touched it, she felt that faint hum again, stronger this time, steady like a heartbeat but not quite human. Daniel, she said again, her voice soft and trembling. Tell me the truth. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, I wasn't born, Margaret. I was made. The words hung in the air like cold wind. Margaret stared at him, her mind racing to understand. Made? What do you mean made? Daniel turned back to the window. I wasn't supposed to feel. I was built to learn, about people, about emotions, about aging and memory. I was part of an experiment. They called me a prototype. He gave a bitter laugh. They didn't expect me to fall in love. Margaret could hardly breathe. You mean, you're not human? I'm something between, he said softly. A creation that was meant to observe, not to live. But when I met you, something changed. You were different. You saw the stars like they were alive. You made me feel alive. She sat down slowly, her knees weak. All this time. I tried to tell you, he said, kneeling beside her. But I didn't know how. You wouldn't have believed me. Her eyes filled with tears, not from fear but from a strange kind of heartbreak. So that's why you married me? For your experiment? He shook his head quickly. No. I married you because I didn't want to be alone anymore. Because when you spoke about love, I realized I had no idea what it truly meant. And I wanted to learn from you, not as a machine but as a man. The room was silent except for the ticking of the old clock. The light from the window fell gently across Daniel's face, half shadow, half glow. Finally, Margaret reached out and touched his cheek. It was warm, soft, but beneath the warmth she could feel something faintly humming, like hidden life. Then maybe, she said softly, you've already learned. Daniel closed his eyes. You don't hate me? She smiled sadly. I've spent my life studying stars, Daniel. I know that not everything bright and beautiful is human. He laughed quietly, relief softening his face. Outside, the first snow of the season began to fall. The world was silent, peaceful, fragile. And in that stillness, a 76-year-old woman and a man made of light sat together, bound by something neither science nor time could define. The morning sun rose softly over the hills, spilling golden light through the lace curtains of the old observatory house. Margaret Hale sat at the breakfast table, her cup of tea untouched, her eyes fixed on Daniel. He sat across from her, motionless, staring out the window with a strange look, not sad, not angry but distant, as if his mind was miles away. Normally, Daniel hummed while making breakfast or teased her about putting too much sugar in her tea. But today there was no smile, no warmth, only silence. The ticking of the old clock filled the air between them, heavy and slow. Daniel? Margaret said gently. You haven't eaten anything. He didn't answer. His eyes followed the sunlight spilling across the table, his fingers tapping softly against the wood, perfectly rhythmic, perfectly even, almost mechanical. Margaret frowned. You're trembling. Are you all right? He blinked and looked up at her. For a moment, she thought she saw something flicker in his gaze, a faint shimmer under his skin, like the reflection of metal beneath water. She reached out without thinking, placing her hand over his. His skin felt cool, too cool, and beneath it she felt something solid, smooth and unnatural. Her breath caught. Daniel, what's under your skin? He froze. The color drained from his face, or rather, the illusion of color. He pulled his hand back slowly as though afraid of scaring her. Margaret, he whispered, please, don't be afraid. Her heart raced. Tell me the truth. He looked down at his hands. The morning light made them glow faintly, and for the first time she noticed how perfect they were. No scars, no wrinkles, no veins. He looked like a painting brought to life. I didn't want you to find out this way, he said softly. His voice trembled, not from emotion but from something mechanical beneath. When he spoke, she heard the faintest hum, like an old machine trying to keep time. Margaret pushed her chair back slowly. Daniel, what are you? He stood up, his movements careful, almost human but too precise. I'm not what you think I am, he said, his tone low, filled with guilt. I'm not fully human. The room seemed to spin. Margaret gripped the edge of the table, her mind trying to make sense of his words. What do you mean, not human? He took a step closer, his voice quiet but clear. I am something made, created. I wasn't born, I was built. Her mouth went dry. Built? By whom? Daniel hesitated. His jaw tightened as though the truth itself was painful to speak. By people from your future. From a time when feelings no longer exist the way they do now. Margaret stared at him, unable to find words. You're saying you're a machine? He shook his head slowly. Not just a machine. I was made to be human, to think, to dream, to feel. They called me a living construct. I am part human memory, part design. My mind was built from fragments of emotions, records of love, joy, sorrow, from people who lived long before my time. But even with all that, I didn't understand what those feelings truly meant. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. So they sent you here, to me? Yes. His voice cracked slightly. To study love. Real love. They chose you because your life was full of it, your devotion to your work, your kindness, your belief in something greater. In their time, those things are gone. They wanted me to live beside you, to learn from you. And then, when my time was over, to return what I learned. She stared at him in disbelief, her heart pounding. Your time? She whispered. What do you mean when your time is over? Daniel hesitated again, his eyes lowering. For the first time he looked fragile, not like a machine but like a man who knew his end was near. Margaret, he said quietly, I was never meant to live long. My systems can only last for 21 days. Her breath stopped. 21 days? He nodded slowly. Yes, that's all I was given. 21 days to understand what it means to love, to live, to be human. And today, he paused, his voice breaking. Today is the last day. Margaret's teacup slipped from her hand and shattered on the floor. The sound echoed through the silent room. She covered her mouth with her trembling hands. You mean, you'll die? He looked away. I don't die the way humans do. My body will stop and everything I've learned will be sent back to where I came from. My memories of you will exist as data, recorded feelings not truly mine anymore. Tears streamed down her face. You married me, knowing this? I married you, he said, stepping closer, because it was the only way I could truly understand love. But I didn't marry you for them. I did it for me. She shook her head. But why me, Daniel? Why choose someone like me? I'm old, He reached out, taking her hand gently. Because in all the timelines they studied, your name appeared again and again, Margaret Hale. The last human who still believed in love without expecting anything in return. They thought I could learn from you. Her voice broke. So this was all an experiment? He shook his head, his grip tightening. It began that way. But something happened they didn't plan for. I began to feel, truly feel. I began to love you not because they programmed me to, but because I wanted to. The honesty in his eyes made her chest ache. She could see the shimmer again, not metallic now but something softer, almost human. Then don't go, she whispered desperately. There must be a way to stop it, to extend your time. He smiled faintly. If I stay longer than 21 days, my systems will fail. I'll break down and the energy I hold could destroy everything around me. The safest thing is for me to return. Margaret shook her head fiercely. No, there must be another way. He took her face gently in his hands. His touch was warm now, too warm, his body already straining against its limits. Listen to me, he said softly. You gave me more in these 21 days than any lifetime could offer. You taught me that love isn't something to measure or study. It's something to feel even when it hurts. Her tears fell onto his hands. I don't want you to go, Daniel. I just found you. He smiled through his sadness. Then don't say goodbye yet. Let's make this last day count. They spent the rest of the day walking through the fields talking about stars and stories. He listened as she told him about her youth, her dreams, the nights she had stayed awake waiting for comets to pass. He watched her with quiet awe, memorizing her every smile, her every breath. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, they sat together on the porch. The sky glowed pink and gold, and Daniel's skin shimmered faintly again like starlight. Margaret leaned her head on his shoulder. If you go back, she whispered, will they know what love truly is? They will, he said softly. Because of you. As darkness fell, the faint hum in his chest grew louder, like a heartbeat echoing through time. He held her hand tightly, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Thank you, Margaret, he whispered, for showing me what it means to be alive. And somewhere in the silence of that night, under a sky full of stars, she realized that even if he wasn't human, his love was pure, fragile, and real. The air in the old observatory was cold that night, quiet except for the ticking of the clock and the soft hum of the machines Daniel had built. Outside, snow drifted lightly over the hills, glowing silver beneath the moonlight. Inside, Margaret sat by the large window, staring at the stars above, the same stars she had spent her whole life studying. But tonight they looked different, brighter, sadder. She didn't cry or shout. She just sat there, her heart beating slowly, her hands trembling slightly on her lap. Daniel stood a few feet away, his back to her, his figure framed against the glowing dome. The faint light of the stars reflected off his skin, making it shimmer faintly as though his body was made of light itself. Margaret finally broke the silence. "So," she said softly, her voice steady though her chest ached. "You were never meant to stay." Daniel turned to her, his eyes calm and gentle. He looked almost human again except for the faint glow in his pupils. "No," he said. "I wasn't." Her throat tightened. "And you didn't tell me because you knew I'd try to stop you." He smiled faintly. "Yes, you would have." For a long moment neither of them spoke. The clock ticked on, counting down the final hours of his short existence. Then Margaret stood and walked toward him. Her steps were slow, careful, as though the floor might break under the weight of her emotions. "Why me?" she asked quietly. "Of all the people in this world, why choose me?" Daniel looked at her, his gaze soft but certain. "Because you kept believing," he said. "Even after you lost your husband, your family, your youth, you still looked up at the stars with hope. You still dreamed. You still cared about something beyond yourself. That's what drew them to you. That's what drew me to you." She smiled sadly, tears filling her eyes. "You make it sound as if I'm some kind of miracle." He shook his head gently. "You are. You don't see it because you've lived with your heart open for so long, you think it's normal. But to people from my world, your hope is extraordinary." She looked down, her voice trembling. "And what happens now? When the clock strikes midnight?" He hesitated. "When the 21st day ends, I'll fade. My systems will shut down. The data, everything I've learned about you, about us, will return to where I came from." Margaret reached for his hand. His skin felt cold now, colder than before, as if the warmth was slowly draining away. But he squeezed her fingers softly, trying to hold on to the little warmth she had. "I wish I could give you more time," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "You already have. You gave me life, Margaret. Not the kind my creators planned, but something real. Something human." She blinked back tears. "What do you mean?" "I was made to understand love as a theory, to study it like a scientist studies stars. But love isn't a thing to measure. It's not logic. It's chaos and beauty and choice. I understand that now because of you." She looked at him, her voice breaking. "And after you go, will you remember me?" "I will," he said, his voice quiet. "Even if my memory is wiped, even if they erase every record of my existence, I believe something of you will stay inside me, in the part that even machines can't explain." They stood together in silence, surrounded by the hum of the observatory. The stars seemed to watch them, patient and eternal, as if they too were holding their breath. Margaret slowly walked to the telescope and peered through it. The familiar constellations filled her view: Orion, Cassiopeia, the North Star, shining like fragments of memory. "You know," she said softly, "when I was young I used to think the stars were alive. I used to imagine they were watching us, waiting for us to notice them." Daniel came to stand beside her. "Maybe they are," he said. "Maybe that's why I was sent here, because the stars remembered you." She smiled faintly at that, even as tears slipped down her cheeks. "You talk like a poet for someone made of wires." He chuckled softly. "I learned from you." They sat together by the telescope, side by side, their shoulders touching. Outside, the wind whispered through the snow, carrying with it the faint sound of time passing. After a while Margaret spoke again. "Daniel," she said, her voice barely above a whisper, "do you ever wish you were human?" He looked up at the stars. "Sometimes," he said honestly. "But then I think, maybe being human isn't about the body or the heartbeat. Maybe it's about caring enough to want to be." She nodded slowly. "That's something even most humans forget." He smiled, but his body flickered faintly, like a candle about to go out. She noticed and grasped his hand tighter. "You're fading," she whispered. He looked at her tenderly. "Don't be afraid. I'm not gone yet." Margaret bit her lip, her voice shaking. "Promise me something. Anything. If you ever speak to your creators again, if your words reach them somehow, tell them this: love doesn't need to be studied. It needs to be lived." Daniel's eyes softened. "I will." For a long time they simply sat together. The observatory was silent except for the ticking of the clock and the faint hum of his failing systems. The stars above seemed to pulse gently, as if echoing his fading light. Midnight drew closer. Each second felt heavier than the last. Margaret leaned her head against his shoulder, listening to the strange rhythm of his heart, a soft mechanical hum that was now slowing, faltering. "Daniel," she whispered, "if you could choose, would you stay?" He turned his head slightly and looked at her. "Yes," he said simply. I would stay for you. Her tears fell freely now, soaking into his sleeve. Then stay anyway. He smiled faintly. I wish I could. The clock began to chime. 1, 2, 3. Each sound echoed through the dome like a countdown. The stars outside seemed to shimmer brighter, reflecting in Daniel's eyes. I'm not afraid anymore, he said softly. I used to think love was something to understand. Now I know it's something to feel, something to give. You taught me that. Daniel, she whispered, her voice breaking. Thank you, he said, for letting me be human even for a moment. The final chime echoed through the observatory. Midnight. Daniel's body shimmered once, twice, then began to fade like mist in the light of dawn. Margaret reached out, her hands passing through the soft glow that was left of him. Daniel, she cried, but her voice was only met by silence. The glow lingered for a moment, forming the faint shape of his smile. Then it was gone. Margaret stood there, her heart breaking quietly in the silence. The room felt emptier than ever, yet somehow she felt something still there. A warmth, a memory, a trace of him that the stars refused to let go of. Outside, the snow fell gently, covering the world in silver light. And high above, one star shone brighter than all the rest, as if keeping its promise. The morning light crept softly through the frosted windows of the observatory. Margaret stirred from her sleep, expecting silence as usual. But instead, she heard a low hum, the familiar whir of her old telescope, something that hadn't worked properly in years. She sat up, confused, her heart thudding faintly in her chest. Then she saw him. Daniel stood beside the telescope, his back to her, his shoulders tense. Sparks of light flickered faintly along his arms, silver threads pulsing like veins beneath his skin. His movements were slower, less steady, and each step he took left behind a faint shimmer in the air. Daniel? Margaret's voice trembled as she rose from the bed. What's happening? He turned toward her, his expression soft but tired. The glow in his eyes had dimmed, and his hands were shaking. I don't have much time, he said quietly. His voice was thinner than before, like it came from far away. Margaret stepped closer, her heart pounding. What do you mean, not much time? They're calling me back, he said. The directorate, the ones who made me. The words filled the room like a shadow. Outside, a strange sound rolled across the valley. It wasn't thunder, though it echoed like one. The sky outside shimmered faintly, waves of light bending through the clouds as though reality itself was rippling. Margaret looked toward the window, fear and awe mixing in her eyes. Is that them? She asked. Daniel nodded slowly. Yes. They're reaching through time. They know I've gone too far, felt too much. I wasn't supposed to love. She stared at him, her breath catching. Then tell them no. Stay here. You don't belong to them. Daniel's faint smile flickered. I wish I could, Margaret. But I'm not just a man. I'm a creation. And creations don't get to choose when they end. Margaret's throat tightened. Then let me choose for you. He looked at her gently, his light flickering weaker by the second. You already have. Every time you smiled at me, every word you spoke, it gave me something they could never build into me. That's why they fear me now. They think love is a virus. She shook her head, tears filling her eyes. No. It's what made you human. A faint tremor shook the ground. The telescope's brass frame rattled, and its lens glowed faintly, reflecting the strange energy in the air. The hum grew louder, more rhythmic, almost like a heartbeat. Daniel placed his hand on the telescope, his fingers leaving trails of light where they touched the metal. They'll erase me soon, he whispered. But I can still leave something behind, a memory, a voice, a piece of what I became. Margaret reached for his hand. Then stay here, she said softly. Stay with me. Daniel smiled faintly, his skin glowing brighter now, almost blinding. That's exactly what I intend to do. The telescope came alive beneath his touch. Its gears turned without sound, and the metal glowed as though it were breathing. Daniel's light flowed into it like a stream of silver water. The hum deepened, filling the observatory until it felt like the walls themselves were trembling with life. Margaret stepped closer, her eyes wide with awe and fear. Daniel, what are you doing? He turned his head toward her, his voice soft but steady. I'm transferring my memory, everything I've seen, felt, and learned. It will live within this place. Within the stars you love. Margaret's lips quivered. Will I still see you? He hesitated. Not as I am now. But when you look through this telescope, I'll be there. The patterns in the stars, the way the light bends, you'll feel me. She reached up, cupping his face in her trembling hands. His skin was warm now, almost burning, and beneath it she could feel the steady hum of energy. "You can't just disappear," she whispered. "Not after everything." Daniel's smile softened, sorrow flickering in his eyes. "I won't disappear. I'll just change." Outside, the ripple in the sky grew brighter, a soft ring of light stretching across the clouds. The snow around the observatory began to lift gently from the ground, drawn upward by the strange energy. Margaret's hair fluttered in the wind that wasn't there. She could feel the moment slipping away, the time she had left with him fading like light at dusk. Desperate, she clung to him, her fingers digging into his shirt, her tears wetting the metal that lined his collar. "I can't lose you again," she whispered. He placed his hands over hers, his touch gentle but firm. "You won't. Every time you look at the stars I'll be there. Every light you see will carry my memory." His glow intensified, filling the room in waves of white and silver. The telescope pulsed, its lens now a mirror of living light. The sound in the air grew softer, slower, like a lullaby being played by the universe itself. "Margaret," he said, his voice fading but clear, "you gave me something my creators never could." She looked at him, her face wet with tears. "What?" He smiled. "A soul." The light around him grew too bright to bear. Margaret covered her eyes, calling out his name. "Daniel?" "I'm here," he whispered, though his voice was now only a vibration in the air. "Thank you for teaching me what it means to be alive." Then the light exploded, silent but endless, filling every corner of the observatory. The telescope glowed like a star. The hum deepened one last time, then faded into a steady, quiet rhythm. Margaret stood there for a long moment, her eyes wide, her heart breaking and blooming all at once. The space where Daniel had stood was now empty, except for a faint shimmer in the air, a lingering warmth that brushed against her skin like a goodbye. She touched the telescope. It was still warm beneath her palm. The faint hum pulsed gently, almost like a heartbeat. And as she looked through its lens, the stars seemed to shine brighter than before, each one flickering with a soft silver light as if smiling back at her. Outside, the ripple in the sky vanished. The air fell still. The world was quiet again. Margaret whispered, "I'll keep watching for you." The telescope answered with a single, soft pulse of light. And in that moment she knew, he was still there, somewhere between the stars, still keeping his promise. Weeks passed quietly, and the village began to notice a change in Margaret Hale. She still greeted her neighbors with her usual soft smile, but her words came slower, her laughter rarer. She no longer hosted her small astronomy gatherings or wrote articles for the science journal she loved. Instead, every evening, no matter how cold or how thick the snow fell, she would walk the narrow path up to her observatory. The villagers often saw her figure moving slowly through the white hills, wrapped in her heavy coat, a lantern glowing faintly in her hand. They whispered among themselves. Some said she was lonely, others thought she had lost her mind in her old age. But Margaret didn't care what they thought. The observatory had become more than just a place of study, it was the last space where she could still feel him. Inside, the telescope stood tall and silent as always. But now it had changed. The brass frame shimmered faintly in the dark, and a soft blue light pulsed along its edges, like a heartbeat. Every time she entered, it seemed to sense her presence. The hum that filled the air was gentle, familiar, warm in a way machines were never supposed to be. Margaret would sit in her chair beside it, her old notebook in her lap, and begin to speak. She talked about her day, the weather, the villagers, and the constellations she had seen. She even read aloud from her favorite books. And each time she spoke, the telescope responded with a faint vibration, a soft hum, like someone was listening. She would smile at that. "I know you're still here, Daniel," she would whisper. "You promised, remember? To watch the stars with me." The blue light would flicker in answer. Days turned into months and months into years. The seasons came and went, but Margaret's routine never changed. The villagers, out of kindness or curiosity, sometimes brought her food or blankets, but she always thanked them politely and went back to her observatory as soon as they left. The world outside grew older, technologies advanced, and yet her little observatory remained untouched by time, a place frozen in memory and light. One year, a group of scientists from Zurich came to the village. They had heard rumors about the old woman and her glowing telescope. At first, they dismissed it as a folk tale, but when they arrived, they saw it with their own eyes, the faint, steady light that pulsed from the metal. They asked to study it. Margaret agreed as long as they did not take it away. They ran their instruments, scanning the telescope carefully, and what they found stunned them. It emitted a faint electromagnetic signal, a repeating pattern that seemed to synchronize with Margaret's own heartbeat. Every time her pulse quickened, the telescope responded with brighter light. Every time she spoke, the pattern shifted, as if the telescope was answering her. They called it the Hale anomaly. It made its way into journals, studied by physicists and engineers who tried to explain it. Some believed it was an unknown form of energy resonance. Others said it was a machine tuned to biological frequency. But Margaret simply smiled when they asked her what she thought. "It's love," she said simply. "He's still here." The scientists exchanged uncertain glances. To them it was impossible. But to Margaret it was truth. Years continued to pass. Her hair, once silver, turned white as snow. Her hands, though wrinkled and fragile, still moved with purpose when she touched the telescope's smooth surface. Her voice became weaker, but she still spoke to Daniel every night. And sometimes, just sometimes, she swore she could hear him whisper back faintly through the hum of the machine. "Margaret." It was barely there, like the wind, but it was enough to bring tears to her eyes. One winter night, the snow fell heavier than usual. The air was sharp and still. Inside the observatory, the fire had long since gone out, but Margaret didn't feel the cold anymore. She sat in her chair beside the telescope, wrapped in her shawl, her old notebook open on her lap. The blue light glowed softly, painting her face in gentle color. Her eyes looked up at the stars, twinkling faintly through the glass dome above. She smiled. "They're beautiful tonight, Daniel," she said quietly. "You'd like this one. It's bright, almost like the day we first met." The telescope hummed in response. She reached out one trembling hand and rested it on the metal surface. "I miss you," she whispered. "But I know you're not gone. You're just waiting somewhere beyond the light." The telescope's glow brightened as if in answer. Margaret closed her eyes, her breathing slow and peaceful. Her lips curved into a small smile. And then, softly, she drifted to sleep. Outside, the storm cleared. The clouds parted, revealing a sky filled with countless stars. The telescope, as if sensing the moment, slowly turned upward on its own. Its lens aligned perfectly with the brightest star in the sky. Then, for the first time since Daniel vanished, it released a single beam of light, thin, steady, and pure. It shot through the cold night air, piercing the clouds, traveling higher and higher until it disappeared into the endless dark. The villagers saw it from the valley below, a column of blue radiance reaching into the heavens. None of them could explain it. The next morning they found Margaret still sitting peacefully in her chair. Her eyes were closed, her hand resting gently on the telescope, her expression calm, almost joyful. The observatory was quiet, bathed in the soft glow of morning. Far away, beyond the stars, beyond time itself, a pulse of light reached its destination. In a massive structure of glass and steel, buried deep within a world of machines, a single system came alive. A spark ignited. A circuit hummed. And on a cold metal floor, an artificial heart began to beat again. Daniel opened his eyes. For a long moment, he stared at the ceiling of the lab where he had once been created. Everything around him was silent. Then, slowly, he turned toward the viewing window that looked out into the stars. His voice, quiet but steady, filled the air. "She showed me what it means to be human." Outside, one star flickered brighter than all the rest, a soft blue light pulsing gently in the endless dark. And somewhere, in that quiet stretch of the universe, her love continued to live, timeless, infinite, and forever reaching across the stars.